Parents and other stakeholders are in a struggle at the State House over resources for better education. From one side, there's a push to allow for more expansion of charter schools. From the other side, there's a push back and concerns that a gain for charter schools will be a loss for district public schools. We recently heard the case for charter school expansion. Tonight we hear from parents who are members of QUEST, or Quality Education for Every Student. We'd like to welcome Megan Wolf and Maura O'Toole. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with Megan. I know you've been concerned about this for a while. What do you see right now as far as what's happening? Why are you worried about that?
Well, I think that we've learned over the past couple of years that the consequences of more and more charter schools are very real for our traditional public school system. The consequences are financial, they're practical, and they really impact the 57,000 kids in Boston Public Schools. So QUEST has realized through our existence over the last 2 years that it's something that we need to be concerned about as public school parents.
Maura, so talk about your case and what you face as a parent.
So I'm not only a parent in the Boston Public Schools, but I work for the Boston Public Schools as well. And I feel
disclosure here.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really my lens of how I see the charter school issue, because I work at a school that's underchosen, and we have a lot of students who are returned to the Boston Public Schools from charters because they didn't really fit the demographic. And I really see a lot of high-need children come back into our school and not having received the services that they need at charters, and we also don't have the resources to provide them the services that they need because every year we see such huge budget cuts.
Any idea how big a deal this is? Because anecdotally, it could be just a trickle, or are we seeing a lot of cast-offs from these charter schools? Do you have any idea what we're talking about?
Well, attrition numbers are pretty impressive in a bad way. If you look at some of the high schools, those are easiest to track. And some of the charter high schools are losing as many as 70% of their kids over a 5-year period. So they get a certain number that enter in 7th grade, and by the end of 12th grade, they've lost 60 to 70% of their students.
Yeah, but they recently came out with a study. They said that their rates aren't any worse than district schools, really, for that level.
Well, I don't think that that's actually true. I think that the number that they often use is a little different than true attrition, because if a student leaves a charter school and then they can track where that student ends up, for example, in Boston Public Schools, that doesn't count in one of the numbers that they're using. So for us, when I as a parent think of attrition, I think of, well, how many students have left, period. Not how many have left and ended up in another school that I can track. So I question some of those numbers.
Maura, what about the resources here? Because I think this is what the question is really all about. So what do you see happening to the district schools?
So basically, classroom in BPS needs to, 85% of the students in a classroom are what fund just the classroom teacher. And anything above that number of, in K, say first grade, it's 22 students. So if you have 85% of 22, that's funding just the teacher's salary and the basic costs. And everything over that is funding, the extras, the art teacher, the music teacher, and the science teacher. And especially in the upper grades, we're seeing classrooms that aren't meeting that minimum number, and so then we're losing money for all those extras across the board in BPS.
Megan, of course, we always heard from the charter folks here is that well, if you have more students sort of migrating from the district schools to the charter schools, the money should do the same thing. So isn't that what's happening, or do you see this somehow being made worse?
Well, I think it's clear that that the situation it's not that cut and dried. Yes, money will then go to the charter school, and there is some reimbursement that's mandated by the state, and the legislature understands that there's loss over a certain number of years to the public schools. Unfortunately, that reimbursement hasn't been fully made, so it means that although the public schools will get some money back, they won't get all the money back that they've expended. The public schools also end up paying for services that they get no reimbursement for example, transportation. Right now, BPS is mandated to transport students to charter schools, but there's not the money to pay for that. So I think the financial costs are very real for our kids, and we see it every day in schools, running out of paper in March, not having enough pencils. As parents, we know that our kids need better than that.
Maura, so what about the mix of the students? The claim from charter schools is that they do serve predominantly students of color from predominantly poor families. So, well, isn't that what they're supposed to be doing?
I would question those statistics too, and I think you also have to look at the families with social capital who know how to get into charter schools, who know how to stay on the lists, who know, they sort of take a subgroup of.
Well, what about the public schools? I mean, do you see that the public schools are getting cornered into serving students who don't fare as well?
And I think you're seeing like huge statistics with ESL and special ed statistics. You'll look at some schools, some of the charter schools have 1% of ELLs, whereas some Boston public schools have 70%.
I think it's one of our concerns that what's happening is that there are two systems of education being developed, and that what we would fear is that the charter schools are serving students who don't have those high needs, and that we'll end up with, the traditional public schools serving all the high needs kids, and the charters serving those students who have needs, and they do serve a financially needy population, but that it won't be equitable. I mean, we can see that now when you look at the numbers in the schools that. In Roslindale, there's a charter school very near the Irving, and the numbers are completely different of who they're serving. The charter school, the Brook, is serving almost no English language learners, while the Irving, I think, is up to, it's like something like 30% of students are ELL. So very different populations.
And what does that mean in the school when you have English language learners? What do they have to do differently that maybe involves more resources?
Well,
so they have, there are different either pull-out models of ESL or whole sheltered classrooms, sheltered English immersion classrooms, and most of those require extra staffing within the classroom. Boston got into an issue with the Justice Department with their ESL services, and they came in and took a really close view and sort of told Boston what to do. So they're really required to have the specific numbers that they're supposed to have in terms of staffing and numbers and materials that they're sort of required to purchase because of this Justice Department case that charters don't always have the same requirements for.
What about the one selling point we keep hearing from, or actually maybe a couple of selling points in charter schools? We have longer school days, longer school years, we have more individualized attention to students. It sounds like something everybody should be doing.
Yep, and I think the public schools try to do that. For example, the school that my children were at, the Rafael Hernandez School in Eggleston Square in Roxbury, has had an after-school program, and I've worked with the board in terms of funding the program. We've struggled, over the last 5 years to get adequate funding to do that. That's school from 2:30 to 6 after school. But the funding, it's a funding issue. That's all it is. The school would want to do that. I think a lot of public schools would want to do that because they agree with the charter schools that that's important for kids. More time is helpful.
Maura, another thing that must be going on in the minds of people up in State House, the reps and senators, is that they must be hearing from the charter folks, we have this huge waiting list. There are all these families, they're just dying to send their kids here because they're not satisfied with a particular public school. What would you tell them about that?
Well, I honestly feel like the charter groups are utilizing so much more money than a group like Quest has to rally people, and they use so many more methods that cost money to get people up to the State House to say those things, right? And I don't think that for whatever it is, Boston Public School parents have the funding resources to be able to organize in that way, and so I feel like it's a little bit of a misnomer. And in terms of the waiting lists, I think, my daughter, who's 13, is still on the waiting lists of charter schools that we applied to in kindergarten. They don't stop their waiting lists. So those numbers are falsely inflated. BPS wipes out its wait lists every year, and I know that school that my kids were at, Mission Hill, had a huge wait list year to year, and people were dying to get in there. And you're not seeing, the senators and reps, trying to push schools like the Hernandez that do two-way bilingual, and schools like Mission Hill who do progressive education to expand those schools as well.
Megan, there was a poll recently that the charters did. They asked BPS parents if they thought charter school expansion was a threat, and a lot of them said they didn't see it that way.
Well, it's interesting. I was lucky enough to get a call. I took that poll I don't know how long ago it was, maybe almost a year ago. And I was stunned when I took the poll, and I really would like to see the questions again, because the way that I remember it, the questions were extremely misleading. There was a lot of language used that was very hard to understand. They were distinguishing between Horace Mann charters, Commonwealth charters, turnaround schools, and they equated quality with charters, so that the questions felt very, very designed to, when I talked about wanting quality, it equated quality with charters. So I couldn't say no if I believed in quality schools. So I would like to see more of the data from that study, because I don't think that it's accurate.
Finally, Maura, any message that you would like to get across to your rep or senator rep there about what to do here?
I mean, I'd really like to hear them. I'd like to listen to their constituents. You know, we've gone up, a group of us, especially from the Jamaica Plain area and different Boston areas, and we've really tried to advocate with our elected officials what we believe to be our feelings, you know, and I feel like a lot of times the senators and the reps are still thinking about what the charters are telling them or what they feel personally, and aren't necessarily analyzing what the people who elect them want.
And your message, Megan, what would it be?
I think it's about better understanding the consequences of charters. We've seen in cities across the country, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Chicago, that the traditional public school systems have been decimated by the effects of charter schools. And I think they should be asking themselves what they want in Massachusetts. Do they want a strong, publicly governed system of public education, or do they want a system that is controlled by outsiders, essentially? So that would be my concern.
Well, I know you're very active on social media at Quest, so there's a place you can look that up on Facebook maybe or something?
Quest, yes, it's Quest BPS on Facebook.
And questboston.org is our website.
Great, thank you both very much, Maura O'Toole and Megan Wolfe from Quest. We'll have more news in just a moment.